go.
But I mentioned to Dr. Chang, one thing I know about her, because we've done some research projects together, is no matter what happens, she is completely unflappable, where I tend to get kind of frazzled. And so I'm very happy to leave the technology in your hands and you can advance the slides. It's 4 o'clock out here in California. We have some other folks from around the country, but I have had quite a bit of history and background with Eastern University students, and we usually connect and share a meal together at the International Leadership Association Conference. And we've got a couple of proposals in between my doctoral students and your doctoral students. So this is a good bridge. So we are going to try to make this as practical as possible. We have co-authored together, we have co-researched together. As you'll see in a minute, we both are responsible for journals and a lot of editing. So our goal today is to let you know a bit about me and then a little bit of a refresher on what Dr. Chang brings to this assignment, and then walk through several different venues for publishing and give you some tools for actually working with editors and moving ahead toward a publication. But I thought, just for fun, when we were starting, it's not really a true or false question when you've got 3 options below this, but would you say yes, no, or maybe? Let's go back to true or false. I could make an argument for any of the 3 options. Would you say that your dissertation work is the best opportunity you'll ever have to get published? So I am expecting you to speak up and to engage with one another. Do you all know each other? Or you're like us, our students have been remote for a year, so they've never even met each other, the last cohort and the incoming cohort. Yeah, but you're not shy, right?
No.
I'm assuming you're not shy. So who wants to take a stab at this? Would you say your dissertation work is the best opportunity that you'll have to get published? Yes, no, or maybe?
No.
Okay, that's definitive. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate. Does anybody disagree with no?
I disagree. I think it's my best choice.
Okay, we have a maybe. Anybody want to say yes?
Oh, I'll say yes, Doc. No problem there.
Okay, so talk to me about your choice, because I think I could make a legitimate case for any of the 3, but it's your dissertation, it's your lived realities. Who wants to create an argument for one of those 3 options?
I'll do
Well,
no.
I'll make some comments. I
Okay.
think it is an opportunity. Boy, you're certainly doing a lot of work in your dissertation. So hopefully the literature review is quality and you're making a contribution. My understanding is getting a whole dissertation published en masse is perhaps not, especially in our field, not typical. But on the other hand, but I've been told that your dissertation is not your best work. It's your first work. And so you're going to improve, thus making your contribution even better. So I guess that makes me a very solid maybe.
Okay. Who else wants to make an argument? I want you each to find your voices because we're small. Not,
Yeah,
mean,
I
not
would-
on this-
I
not
would
on this
agree with
question,
you.
But in general, go ahead.
Kelly, I would agree with you on the maybe. I'm a solid maybe, and it's not just because I'm Canadian. I think it's, I've heard too that the dissertation is an opportunity, but ideally there will be better work to follow after.
I was on the dissertation committee with Kay Nussbaum, who won the Dissertation of the Year award last year, right? Boy, she did an unbelievable job on her dissertation and could easily turn it into a book, I think, but it depends. I disagree with there's a slogan that floats around that basically a good dissertation is a done dissertation. I don't agree with that. There are a lot of very bad dissertations out there. Okay, so somebody else started to speak.
Well, Dr. Longman, since I'm the one that threw the yes out there.
Okay.
I'm an engineer by trade, so anything that's not a number doesn't tend to make a whole lot of sense to me. And I'm sure as Dr. H is listening, she'll attain to this, that my writing is definitely not there yet.
Okay.
I do have hopes to get there, but it definitely is a struggle. So to overcome my analytical brain, I'm hoping that, that this program will get me there. I'm sure it will, but it's going to take quite the effort.
Mm-hmm. How would you answer that, Dr. Chang?
I would say yes.
Mm.
If when I look at all my work and publication of the past, I put the most effort, and I had never produced as best and most work as my dissertation, even though that happened in so many years ago. So what I'm writing and publishing now is a different kind of publishing, but the level of engagement and the work that I put into, and that was my dissertation. So I would say best opportunity for me.
Mm-hmm. So it depends a lot. In our program here at Azusa Pacific University, everybody is working in higher ed. Many of them are expected to publish as part of their jobs. Your program is more diverse. As you were saying, Major Ben, learning to write in an academic tone and taking ownership of the literature in a certain area are both very time consuming. And your dissertation, because chapter 2 needs to cover the relevant literature and you've got a thumb in your back to be, thorough, to write something later when you're out of practice and you have not had feedback on writing papers and there's not this tome hanging over your head, almost like a book. One of our doctoral students, who's the dad of 2 little girls, told his kids all the way through his dissertation that he was writing a book, and they could get that. They understood that their dad had to write certain chapters of his book. And your dissertation certainly should be a foundation that can spin off into any other kinds of research that you list in the final chapter, recommendations for future research. But I don't think you're as primed, unless you really intend to pursue the life of a scholar. You don't have the bandwidth and the time and the incentive to publish the way you do with your dissertation. So I think you could make a legitimate case for each of the 3, but we find, I don't know if this is true for the Eastern program, the farther students get away from their coursework and consumed back with their regular jobs, their family responsibilities, their other life, the harder it is to finish their dissertation. So one recommendation would be, while you're on a roll, you've had feedback on your writing, you're thinking like a scholar, you've got a group of colleagues all doing their dissertations, and I'm glad to see Karen on the Zoom here because we've crossed paths many times and I know she just finished. You're just in the mindset of writing and publishing right now as you're working on your dissertation, and to let that slip out of your fingers, I think it would be very hard to get back into all that it requires to publish well. So anyway, let's go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Just a little bit about me. I think one of the reasons that our good friend Dr. Hernandez asked if I would be involved is that I co-edit a journal. I used to have a copy right here, but you can see a picture of it. Comes out 4 times a year. It is the subtitle. It focuses on Christian higher education. The subtitle is an international journal of research, which we take very seriously, theory and practice. Our goal is to really emphasize the word international, not to be too North American based, but to be the clearinghouse and the repository for people in post-secondary ed, universities, seminaries, Bible colleges, Bible institutes. Literally, there's about 700 of those schools around the world, as well as about 900 church-related institutions in the United States. And so we want to be the go-to place for anybody doing research on Christian higher education. We just published a double issue actually on doctoral studies. There's about 180 doctoral programs in the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, which Eastern is a part of and Azusa Pacific is a part of. So we had 10 articles. Dr. Chang wrote one of those articles, co-authored one, looking at the state of doctoral studies in Christian higher education. And then on the right there are 7 books that I was co-editor of a series with the ILA, the International Leadership Association, I was the lead editor on the first one, Women in Leadership in Higher Ed. And then there's one on boards. There's one on leadership theory, because almost all of the leadership theory historically has been written by men and made male assumptions about leadership. The one with the maze and the purple down below is on communication styles and the media. And then there's two that relate to international issues, women in leadership around the world. So that's kind of well, I've published quite a bit, but I direct the PhD program in higher ed here at APU. And my co-presenter today, next slide.
Okay. So before I speak about myself, actually, Dr. Karen Longman received the Researcher of the Year award from Azusa University. So she's a celebrated scholar, researcher, publisher, editor on her campus as well as around the world. So she's, I know several of our students have cited her work as they're writing women's leadership. So it's a great that she has agreed to speak to us. And she's also, she just finished the terms as the Board of Fellows for the doctoral program. So she greatly is concerned about the quality of our doctoral education. So I am here because Dr. Longman and I have given this kind of publishing workshops at the conferences multiple times. And so we are we're partners in crime in many different ways. I also share passion for editing and writing, and I'm currently involved in several journals for editing, and also I founded 2 journals. So I edited those 2 journals for the last 20 years. And Dr. Kathy Ann Hernandez is also on the editorial board for the IJME and then as well as in others. So we kind of, it's editing, writing, it's just part of what doctoral scholarship is. So we want you to feel that you are in the same journey as we are. We have taken a few steps ahead of you. And so that's what we are sharing, this information. When I was in a doctoral program, my advisor, Dr. Harry Walcott, was the editor of a journal. It's the Anthropology and Education Quarterly. And I wish that he had spoken a lot more about writing and editing when I was a student. He was a wonderful advisor, but he wasn't very much intentional about sharing this mysteries about writing and publishing and so on. So I think it's all 3 of us, Hernandez and Longman and I, we all feel that there's no reason to keep all this in secret. So I'm glad that you're here to take part in some of the backstage ideas about what it takes to publish and what it takes to edit and get involved in this world of sharing scholarship internationally. Okie doke. So back to Dr. Longman.
So our hope, and I need to end at about 20 after 5 here. So we have about another hour to go and a bunch of slides. So we will work through them and give you opportunity. But one of our goals is to get concrete with you. You are at a time when you're primed to seek out a journal or to think about publishing your findings as a book. I was mentioning earlier, getting a journal article or multiple journal articles seems to me to be a lot more realistic, but we'll see where we go with today's session. And then to help you identify a publication target. You may feel like this is a big mysterious world and it's hard to break into that world, but from the other side, I would say as an editor of this journal, There are literally hundreds of journals in different categories, different topics, different levels of rigor. There are journals looking to publish. I mean, there are journals that are seeking out articles, and there are other journals that have a 3 to 5 year waiting list to get your article published because they have so many articles in the queue backlogged. So one of the things is to think about, are you aiming for an article, maybe a book chapter, or maybe a book itself? And then we're going to actually ask each other how to be sharp going through that process and realize that whatever your target is will have probably its own distinctive process to begin thinking about getting published and taking the appropriate steps. But in part, I mean, we all know, even with ProQuest, when you do your dissertation, unless you're a doctoral student or you're a scholar and you know how to access ProQuest, which the common, scholar reader out there doesn't necessarily dip into ProQuest every day. And for your first year students, ProQuest is the repository electronically where you can do a search. Like if you were interested in autoethnography, you could do a search for Dr. Chang and find every dissertation she's chaired. You can do searches by topic, you can do searches by keywords and find other dissertations. But really, it's the search engines through journals and the keywords through journals, as we'll talk about later, that let your work get out there. And if you've done a lot of work and you're excited to have something to contribute, you want other people to be able to find it. So it was interesting. One of the leaders in the field of women in leadership told me a few years ago that she is no longer targeting book chapters because it's so hard to share information and for people to find your book chapter. She's targeting peer-reviewed journals now, because with the search engines, it's a lot easier for people to find your work from all over the world. So you just want to maximize the work you've done and get it out there.
Okay. So we are going to tell you about, there are several ways to get your ideas out there. First type is a journal article. Second is a book chapter. Third is the book. And then, of course, there are different ways to communicate to the audience through your the professional essays or even blog and multiple other things. And here we are going to focus more on the first two. However, that I will speak about publishing a book as well. So let's start with the writing a journal article or publishing in journal. There are different types of journal articles you can publish. And this is an important information that you need to keep in mind, because not all journals will publish all types of articles. And if you go to their aim or scope of the journal site, they will say specifically what type of articles they will publish. So I want you to be familiar with what type of articles that you will prepare to publish and then where you should go and submit. So first of all, single author, co-author, there could be multiple authors. So these are you can do that. Now keep in mind that now with the APA, the citation, only the first author will be referenced in the text. So that's yet another thing in your mind. It's nice to be second, third, and fourth authors, but if you really have done the majority of the work, and if it's your research, then make sure that you become the first author. So something that you need to negotiate as you're writing and publishing. The types of article. The first type, which is oftentimes considered to be probably the most prized and important article, is that reporting your original research. So that's why I think that dissertation research is the best opportunity, because you really have put a lot of intentional, thoughtfully designed work. And so the original research report will include the information about how you conducted the research and then what results you have gotten. Of course, it's all framed with literature. So original research is one type. The second type of the article is the conceptual theoretical article. So the Kelly said earlier about this possibly literature review could become a good article. And this is that type of article that you can present. It's not just merely saying that these are the literature is available, but you want to make sure that it's very well framed and the focus is clear, and you're going to say something new insights about the body of literature, about the topic that you will be presenting. But this is conceptual theoretical article is another type. Not all journals will publish this type of article. So go and look for that information in the journal description. The third type is it's a little similar to the maybe second type, but it has a very distinctive characteristics. So when somebody says a meta-analysis article, then what it really means is that they have done a much more systematic the comparison of the published work. Oftentimes, this published work is that research, the original research reports. So that this meta-cognitive, meta-analytic work does present that how the different research that has been conducted will speaking into that particular topic. So the Leadership Quarterly, for example, they do publish meta-analytic work. It takes a lot of serious research. It's often done by multiple authors, but it is tremendously helpful for dissertationers because that you can have a grand view of the literature and then also that the original research that has been conducted in the field on the topic. The last type is that some journals that are much more practically oriented, the journal will publish something like that, practical article, which often means that some ideas have been tested in the field and they will present that what has happened in the field and so some best practices. So these are types of articles that you can write. All of them could potentially be anchored on your dissertation, although that meta-analysis will have to go beyond their dissertation, so and so on. But there is something to look at. So certainly first and second type of an article is something that you want to focus on with your dissertation. Now, what's the benefit of a publishing journal article as opposed, and then drawbacks? So I think Dr. Longman mentioned earlier that it's visibility and then timeliness. And so this is all very, very good thing about the journal. Drawback is that depending on the journal, sometimes your journal can be tied in that process over 2 years. The journal publishing, I will talk about that in the next slide. Let me just move quickly. Journal publishing that you do not submit to the multiple journals at the same time. It is an etiquette in the academic world because when you submit your article to one journal and it goes out to the peer reviews, and oftentimes peer reviews are the well-known scholars in the field, they do not like to see same article being submitted by different people and land at their desk to be reviewed. So it is definitely no-no. As an editor, I have received that articles that were submitted somewhere else. And then we definitely, when we find out, definitely that person is in the blacklist, so to speak. So it is a serious business to submit to the one place. So when you write and submit and peer reviewed and revised, and sometimes it can be peer reviewed multiple times before it is accepted. Even after it's accepted, you will be expected to do multiple more editing. So when you do the dissertation, you may feel like, okay, I am editing forever. Well, welcome to the world of editing, because that is the process. And through editing, your work will be refined and to the point where it could be published. So the published articles that you read at the top level journal means that it has gone through many layers of refinement to get to your eyes and your desk for the consumption. And so this is the process, right? And there are different types of publications that you can do. And I will talk about a little later that how to find the most fitting journal for your article. Writing a book chapter, and Dr. Longman said that there is a possibility. I will tell you why it's possible, especially for young authors, if you are given the opportunity, but also that it is a great place for some seasoned scholars, but this should not be the only place you publish. And it'll tell you one thing. So book chapters, right? The book chapters benefit is that because that's the book chapter, when there is a call for chapters is out for you to see, that means that someone else, editors, book editors, have already done the good work to frame that, and they have a very specific ideas about what kind of chapters are going to fit in. So for you as an author, even though you don't have a chapter and manuscript in your hand, that you can shape your manuscript that be a perfect fit to the article, so to the book. So that in some ways, it's that pre-framing that is handed to you, it's very helpful. So that's a benefit. And then also that when you find the call for chapters that really fits your research, I really recommend you to jump at it, because that compared to the acceptance rate to the journal, you can consider that acceptance rate for a book is relatively high, because that they are attracting people, the scholars who are already in the field and who write well, and then also who have a wonderful research. So there are, if there is a match already clear in your mind, then there's a high possibility for your proposal for the chapter to be selected. So that is the benefit. Drawback is that discoverability. So sometimes what people have done is that with the permission, people oftentimes that provide some summaries of the chapter and put it in a is a different venues like a ResearchGate or academics, and then or even just a website, so that people can discover the chapter better. And sometimes the entire chapter could be uploaded with the permission of the editor, or not your final version, but before the final version is allowed to be uploaded. So that, in other words, you have to do your self-promotion for the chapter, even though publisher will do the marketing of the entire book. There's no the royalties for the book chapter or the journal article. Now, chapter processes that typically goes with the call for chapters. So this is one reason why people like to be a part of the professional associations, because you will be encountering this kind of information much closely, much easily. So when the call for chapters is out there and by the colleagues in the international leadership associations and many other places, then you know that they want your work. You always have to believe they want my work, and I'm going to make it fit, because you would not have written anything that is already prepared for the chapter that you had never known until you see the chapter, call for chapter. So you will always have to embrace this attitude that I'm going to make it fit. I'm going to go for it. And the worst, really worst, is that being rejected and that's worse. That's, yeah, so that's the worst. There's no other worse than things. So you have to really embrace that attitude. And then typically that editors will say, okay, I like your proposal, and then you write from there. So again, acceptance happens much earlier. Of course, they will have to have a layers of revision, right? So there are multiple things. Writing a book, I know several of our students actually have published their dissertations as books. And it can come different ways. So I just want you to know that there are different ways of publishing, but don't necessarily think that you have to tie your entire dissertation until the book comes out. That's not the case. You can still write and publish articles out of your dissertation. And then, so you can still publish books as long as the wording and exactly things are not exactly taken out of your dissertation. It is okay. And but book publishing is that, of course, your dissertation is likely a single authored one, and that you will have to go after publisher who will be publishing. The edited book is not about your dissertation. So what Dr. Longman was talking about is her edited book is that it has multiple authors, as you have encountered many of the edited books, the books. For dissertation, it is likely a single authored work, and it's likely that it takes a lot of revision, and then also like a lot of taking things out and making things work. And a lot of people tend to think, okay, I have to revise first before I submit to the publisher. But I would say, I think you should contact the publisher, and then whether the publisher is interested in your idea, and then make this reshaping of your dissertation into a book. You cannot assume that publisher wants that the way that you present your work. It does not work most of the times. So that's certainly that I will be happy to talk to you about how to approach them and so on. But it's oftentimes it is actually wiser for you to publish your journal article first before you take the entire thing out as a book. For example, my dissertation was published as a book, and then after the book came out, it was hard for me to pulling things out of that book into the journal article. So I wish that I had done and in a different ways, different direction. But the typically book is that your publisher that you're contacting is not going to see your dissertation. They're not as generous as your dissertation advisors to read your manuscript. They will expect you to prepare prospectus, and every publisher does post what they are looking for in the prospectus. So for example, go to Sage publication and go to the tab where it says full author, and go and read what kind of information they are expecting. There are some publishers that routinely publish dissertations, especially in European the publishers. But again, so for example, Robert French, he had his dissertation published, and perhaps that he could be the good source and how his dissertation ended up being published. We have a number of others. The couple of the work about Africa were published. And then I think it's yeah, some others in the US, their work was published as a book. So there are different types of publishers. The university press is considered to be most prestigious academically, but they are not a very good sellers. And then commercial academic press, they tend to market the work the best, but also that it's not as prestigious as a university, but it works, it distributes the work very well and globally. And then association press, like ILA doesn't have a press, but there are different associations. They do have a book series and whatnot, but it's a very difficult to get in. And then lastly, the commercial trade book is probably that most difficult to get in, but it doesn't have as much of an academic prestige. So different venues.
Can I just jump in here? I don't know if you could speak a little bit. There are a number of companies that target doctoral students, and they will write you out to the blues telling you that they want to publish your dissertation. So just maybe some words of caution about how to be wary of them.
Right. It's a very good. So for example, there is a press called Cambridge Press, and they sort of appear to be related to the Cambridge University Press. It is not. But so the question for you is that, should I tie my work with a publisher like that? That means that if they have a copyright and technically you don't have a right to take anything much out of that, your dissertation. So something that we are here, definitely, we have some perspectives about it and happy to share if there is some interest. But be careful. I think Dr. Nanda's caution is very reasonable. Okay, so I think it's I am going to spend maybe next 10 more minutes about this journal particularly. But before doing that, I will stop for a moment and then take some questions about the different types of publications that you could possibly do with your dissertation work. Or even before dissertation, by the way. We have a good number of students who have published their term papers, and of course it needed a lot of work, but also that literature review pieces and so on. So I don't necessarily think that you have to wait until your dissertation is done to get into this publishing business. So any questions?
Dr. Chang, this is Tanitha. I do have a question, and you
Sure.
just alluded to it a little bit. Sometimes I think like when we're writing, particularly our final papers, is that an opportunity for publishing when it's all said and done? There's a lot of work that goes into them, you know, particularly when it's like 20 pages, 25 pages. How would we even get started? And at what point do we know that this is potentially an opportunity to publish?
Very good. Tanita, that's a great question. And I would say that there are actually many cases in our program. People have submitted their own papers and to different venues for publication. So it is done, it can be done. Now the question is that where I find opportunities, and I'm going to talk about that, finding a fitting journal. It is a lot of work leading up to the term paper, but also there's a lot of work and turning the term paper to the article. So be prepared mentally and think of it, as I said, it is a business of publishing. It's not that your first submission gets published. It never happens. So be prepared that it is the good work. If they ask you to, if the editors ask you to revise it, because not all submissions do get to be invited for revision. Now you will know, you will have to decide whether that term paper is a good one for the fitting journal. And as I said, the worst thing is being rejected. And that is a part of the publishing game as well. So first time it will be very, very hard. Your heart is going to break. But brokenness is not going to last forever. If you reframe your mind and saying that, okay, well, this is part of the game, then you will just, then you will know how to prepare for it and then ready to embrace rejection. But if you're invited to revise, you will go for it. And then whether it will be published or not is not your decision, but you will keep moving. And then also that the journal that you submitted rejected does not mean that it is a forever rejectable. It is not. It can go somewhere else. It can be published elsewhere as well. So it is a game of tenacity, a game of self-belief, and then the game of editing. And that's, if you can embrace that, and then there will be find a good result. So I'm going to do that. It's a good question, Tanisa, and hopefully that I can speak a little bit more about and then how to find the journal. Would that be all right?
Could I insert
Sure.
a thought as well? And
Yeah.
you can push back if you want. I think it might be helpful at this point to take a 30,000 foot or a 40,000 foot look at what we're talking about. I often talk about that we have a body of literature kind of circle, and your contribution, whether it's research-based or synthesizing the literature or conceptual or best practices, somehow needs to be pushing out the body. That the whole point in APA of putting the date after the citation is to say in 1992 we knew this, and in 1997 we learned that, and then in 2003 we learned this. So it makes me, I agree, and I encourage our doctoral students to think about their best doctoral papers. Is there a way to turn this into a publication? But on the other hand, as somebody who receives very bad submissions that are not well written and don't really contribute anything. I mean, journals typically are not just looking for anything to publish. They're looking for something that, we use the expression, that really sings, that you feel excited about, that you feel like you've got a new angle or a new insight or a new best practice that's going to contribute to the literature. So think about, with your dissertation and with the papers, where have you gotten energized and you say, boy, I've got something that really the field could benefit from hearing. So yeah, you have to be sensitive to the overload of editors that are getting a lot of submissions too, and say, what am I contributing that really adds to the body of knowledge? That's the whole purpose of a dissertation.
Mhm.
And can I just add something to what Karen said too? I think, especially as new doctoral students, I think it would be helpful to try to collaborate with someone who has published before, because you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't, one of my first publications was with my one of my committee members, and he helped me along. And depending on how the work is distributed, you can negotiate who gets first authorship or not, but it will help you understand what's involved.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we want to make sure that that how to balance that the good work, that it's a lot of work that on your part, and then also that the work that you can publish. But as a first timer, you cannot really gauge what is the gap between your hard work and then your publishable work. So as I said that until that you find the level of a journal that you submit, and then even go through the process, and if you end up being rejected, still there is a learning that is happening. So it is, again, whether you are a risk taker or not, that is something for you to think about. For some people who are very cautious and sometimes also miss out the opportunities. And then I also want to caution against that. So for example, that there's some regretful moments in my academic life that I could share with you. I gave a presentation about my my dissertation. That was before my dissertation was completed, or even around that time. And there was an editor of a journal came up to me and said, this is a fabulous work. You should put it together and you should submit. That was a really wonderful invitation. I had no idea that what that meant at the time, and I never pursued it. And then I regret that I had not pursued it. So because I am quite cautious about my producing a perfect work, and that sort of inhibited me from moving forward. On the other hand, when I see my my doctoral students who have started this publishing game earlier, and when I say game, it sounds negative, doesn't it? The publishing, and they have actually published multiple articles before they graduated. And then some of them are risk takers. They say, there's nothing that I will lose, and so I'm going to proceed. Of course, that her work was, her and his work, their work was excellent because they put the effort. So it's not that any term paper that has to go out, but really needs to be prepared to fit the journal. And you find the one that is fundamentally fitting, but of course you have to shape it so that it is going to fit in. And that's what the Dr. Longman is going to talk about. The editors, we can pick out the term papers. I mean, with both eyes closed, to be honest, because a lot of times people just submit their term paper, and that is not going to make it. But it's sometimes we can see that what some junior has done, but it's really well prepared for the journals, then they have a high chance. So don't be discouraged, but be prepared for it. So thank you, Tanis, again. That was a great question that brought out some good insights in our conversation. Other questions before we move forward? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the journals. You know, among us, Dr. Pierce on our faculty, he had run a workshop in the past, and that he is going to continuously help our students. And so I want you to take these opportunities to learn more about these journals. What I'm going to talk about here is that I want to make sure that there is a wide layers of journals that you can publish, not all of them top of it. And you should not always think that that is the only thing that you can start with, and no. So so when the highly published scholars in a high impact journals are speaking about high impact publication, I want you to know what that is. But I don't necessarily feel that you should be discouraged that you feel like you cannot reach that high. So I want you to know that where to find the fitting journals for your work and your level, and especially at this stage. And that I want you to believe that there is a possibility, high possibility, for your work to be published if it's well prepared. So let me start with the high impact journals. When I say high impact journals are the really top tier, maybe top, and then maybe second kind of tier journals. There are some indexes that list them. So you can find some journals that you are familiar with in those. There are many journals that are not included in the indexes, but still worthy to pursue. There's a various reasons why they are not included. They could be maybe the mid-tier, but that's still reputable journals. So don't feel like you are sort of stifled by only these lists. But I want you to know that what these indexes mean, and then what they are. So for example, in social science index, social science citation index, that our leadership, business, and then that kind of work is being collected, top tier journals are collected, is that SSCI. Last year, they included the 331 journals around the world. And they are primarily English speaking, but there are some of them are not English speaking. No, pardon me. They're all English speaking journals, by the way. And then the same company, Clarivate Analysis, they also have a newer journal that is emerging. They are considered to be still high impact, but not as high as already established work. So emerging source citation index that has 832 journals around the world. Again, you can go and look at and search the journals that has a sort of topic that you are interested in. So another place that I actually like to use and easy to use, it's called SJR, and the Smigo Journal and Country Ranks. It has over 5,000 journals, and that it's a much more broadly indexed and around the world in multiple languages. It's not only in English, but this is a great place for you to look. These the journals are included. They also are open access as well as subscription based. They are top tier, but also that they have second and mid tier journals. So there are many journals are accessible. So if you search, it's a SJR, and they sometimes they say Science Journal ranking. So it's the same place. But again, you can look at high impact journals. Now, so when I encounter some journals, then I oftentimes go to SJR and see whether that journal is listed in that. If not, I go to the journal site and I read their aim and scope and see that whether this is a reputable journals. I do look at the editorial board, and then I also look at who the publisher is, whether that is one of those .com that publishes 100 journals to collect money. No. So I am selective, but this is a good start. Now that you sometimes hear people say impact factor, and that is the number. So the people who like the number, and I want you to know the impact factor indicates that how well does a certain journals are cited. And then journals that are in the social science citation index, and they publish that IF impact factor, and that's very prestigious. Some impact factor could be 20, but it's a lot of them are under 5, and but still that even the fact that impact factor is noted means that this journal is already pre-selected for the social science citation index. So that's a good indicator. SJR uses a different algorithm to calculate their significance. And so they created impact factor, SJR indicator, or H index. There is have a different algorithms. The bottom line is that they want to sort of compare and contrast the journals that has high reputation or not. Once you sort of get the sense of it, then you will see the ranking. So SJR also that if you go in and then you can search leadership or organization or business or management or human resource, and it's a topic, and then all the journals that carry or deals with those topics will show up, and they will ranking them so that you will know which one has a high reputation and not. And then H index is that the person's reputation as a scholar. So Google Scholar, for example, if you find that Norhaus, for example, then you will see that what is his H indexes. And typically, the people who have a high H index and tends to be in the business of publishing, it's more seasoned scholar and have written a lot, and their work has been cited a lot. And so the higher at the H index indicates that it's the people who have a much more scholarly the visibility in the field. Now, so how to find a target journal for you And of course that you want to make sure that your topic that you are writing about is going to the journal that it fits. Some journals like a Leadership Quarterly and published a lot in a wide scope of things about leadership. So it could publish HR issues as well as organizational design. There are some journals are much more defined in terms of that topic and discipline. The bottom line is that you need to read the scope of the journal to see that what kind of work they publish. Yeah. And then also that preferred journal type, and typically it doesn't matter nowadays, it's so digitized. But I want you to know that there are very reputable online journals, but many of the online, even reputable online journals require authors to pay article processing fee, which can be quite expensive. So I want you to be aware of it. That payment will happen after you get accepted. If the journal is a really reputable journal, then they may give you the waive because of your whatever student status. But it's a lot of people who publish in the open access, and oftentimes that have some good financial backing for the grant and so on. So the article processing fee, it's not in itself is evil, but it's as a grad student, as the research that has not been funded, it can be challenging. So just to be aware of that. Yeah. But open access journal has a higher reach to the world, so it has a quite remarkable visibility, especially if it's not a predatory journal. It's a good journal. All right. So also the methodologically fit. The one way for you, or let's say 2 ways for you to determine that whether your article is going to fit in journal is that, first of all, that the read again, aimed and scope. If they say we only accept qualitative research report, then if yours is a quantitative, it's not going to make it, even though your article is a fantastic, and they will be right away rejected. If your journal does not say whether it prefers one way or the other, it's likely that they will accept any. Then a good way is that they're going to see their preference is that going through the articles they have published for the last 3 years. And then you may want to take a look at what kind of the articles are being published. And if it's a more quantitative articles, you will know that editorial preference is for the quantitative. So be smart about that. All right. So that locate, and then also another thing that I do is that typically if I have an article in mind, is that I actually select about 3 to 5 journals. And then I visit all the journal sites and see the aim and scope, and then I cut out anything that does not fit. And then also that I do look at what is their publication requirements, all of that. So that kind of research is needed. And then it is not that because I have seen I have cited an article before, if you feel that that's where you're sent, and if it's not a good fit, it is not going to be even peer reviewed. And then the ones I select maybe 2 final journals, then what I do is that I do go through the journals and then look at some articles that has touched upon the kind of work that I'm submitting. And so they're making sure that mine is not exactly the same scope, but it is, they have published something like mine, and that is a good sign. And then also that I do look at some the other articles in the journals that I want to publish, and that employs the methodology that I am using. And then I sort of look at the frame work of the article And then I use that kind of framework to shape my article. So in that way, I want to make sure that my editors will see that I have done the homework, and then I'm pretty confident that this would be a good fit. Yet another thing is that I do cite articles from that journal. That's because that it's the best to know the journal when I submit mine and then be published. So anything related to the topic that I'm covering, I want the editor to know that I know what you have published before. And then my work is related to what you have published. And then therefore, here I am. And as an editor, I don't always look for it, but when it shows up, and it really gives me confidence that author knows the journal well enough to see that their work is a good fit for ours. So these are the three things that I do as I am determining the target. So this is, I'm going to stop here before Dr. Longman comes back for the next steps, and I'm going to stop and entertain your questions about finding the journal.
Huan,
Yes.
No, Dr. Longman has to leave in a bit. So if we could just hold the question, or Karen, what's your preference?
Good job.
Yeah. Does anybody have a quick question or something to clarify? We'll take a few minutes at the end as well. Probably have another 6 or 8 slides. So yeah, so let's move ahead. And I think if I were to react, if I were in your shoes, especially for the first year students, you might feel a little overwhelmed at this point. So let me just suggest maybe a back door or side door way to think about what was just said. My former job, which was a vice president for academic affairs and dean of the faculty, I was not required to do research. And yet when I moved into working with a doctoral program, I was definitely expected to do research and get publications. By the time you're done with your dissertation, and by the time you're done with good papers for your doctoral work, you have been exposed to 20, 30, 40, 100 different articles that relate to the topic you're working on. And you will begin to get acquainted with the journals. You will see which of these journals are more top tier scholarly, highly rigorous, written for a niche audience versus which are more narrative, which are more accessible, which are more practical. The first article I published, I was working with a research team and I didn't know what I was doing. We just found an article and printed it off for everybody and said, we can do this. You know, we need a 1.5-page introduction. We need 2 pages to describe our methodology. We need to synthesize the literature review. So there's different ways of going about this, but I just want to give you some reassurance that as you're working with the literature, you're going to begin to get a sense of the tone of and the expectations. Different journals have very different standards, the aims and the scope. What are they interested in publishing? Like we get submissions all the time that don't fit the journal. They have very little to do with Christian higher education.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get other articles where people have clearly done their homework and have targeted a journal, and they know, because we're trying to serve and strengthen the field of Christian higher education, that we are looking for articles that will help institutions around the world do their work better and be smarter and be research-based. So if you find a couple of journals, 2 or 3 journals that keep showing up in the research that you're doing for your papers and for your dissertation especially, you're going to begin to get a sense, oh, like there are certain journals on higher ed administration. I've found out about journals I never heard about just by looking at where are other people publishing that I'm citing them. So anyway, so what I want to do is work through a handful of slides here and say, as you think about an article, how do you begin to shape that? And my question at the top there was, what strikes you about this outline? Usually an article, particularly in a research-based journal, will be structured with an introduction. And by the way, usually it does not say at the top introduction, it just begins by flowing right into the introductory material, then a lit review, then research, your research method. That should be secondly, your findings usually is after your research methodology. Then a discussion where you link your findings with the literature that's already out there. You compare and contrast. And then you have a section that's called limitations, one on recommendations for future research and implications for practice, and a land the plane conclusion. When you look at the structure of an article, what strikes you about the outline that's in front of you on the screen? Anything? Dr. Hernandez, does anything strike you? Are you with us there?
Well, I was going to say it's a very similar outline to the dissertation.
Well, there you go. That's what I'm looking for. So thank you. I mean, essentially, I can hardly imagine publishing a dissertation into a book where anybody would want to read it. But you can get a book out of your dissertation, but you can certainly think about the structure of a journal article. In many cases, for many journals, they're not all the same, but very similar. So chapter 1, why is this topic important? What do we already know? What's the foundation for what I'm going to research? What's the gap? Why should anybody care? Why should anybody read this? You've got your research questions in there. Then chapter 2, you're synthesizing and summarizing the key literature in that body of knowledge. Then you're going to describe your methodology. Different journals expect different levels of rigor and standards for your methodology section. Some want a lot, some don't want much. So look at the journals and see what's the level of rigor and detail they expect. And then discussing your findings, ditto. I mean, some want a lot of detail about your findings. Others are more oriented toward a practical approach. And then discussion is comparing and contrasting what you found with what we already knew from the literature. So really, those 6 chapters, it's not exactly, but you're covering the same material in your dissertation. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are just things to think about that could be kind of fun to play with. Sometimes I say to our students, you know, as you're thinking about your research question and what you might title your dissertation or your article, you might have a running list of 8 or 10 or 12 ideas. And what I suggested there, as you think about your title, you want in a very few words, sometimes there's letter limits or word limits to convey the main purpose of what your article will cover. The title is often the first thing and the only thing that people look at to figure out if you're in the ballpark of what they're interested in. So it needs to be clear and complete, not ambiguous. I said, you think about using the subtitle. I would say the vast majority of dissertations and journal articles have a subtitle. So you can have a nice, crisp title and then a subtitle that elaborates a bit or shows the nuance or the contribution of what you will be publishing. And when we use the term discoverability, somehow in the title, you need words that when people are using search engines now, they're going to find your article. Let's go to the next slide. So I don't know, as you're looking for your dissertation work in your papers, for most journal articles, I would say people start by reading the abstract, usually 150 to 250 words. A good abstract, the APA manual, by the way, if you're all using the 7th edition of the APA manual, has a fabulous description of what should be in an abstract, pages 73 to 75. I have printed that off and saved it as a PDF and told the students, please read page 73, 74, 75 of your APA manual. But in a research article, you want to talk about the purpose of your study and the purpose of your article, the research methodology, what's the rigor and scope? The reader needs to figure out, do you know what you're doing? Do your findings, if it's a quantitative study, have reliability, have validity? And what contribution does this article make so it's worth their time? In general, you should avoid just taking sentences out of your article and plugging them into the abstract. This is your chance to synthesize and to be clear and to be accurate, and not to make it a sales pitch for your article, but to be very clear on why someone should dip into the article as a whole. What's the next slide? Oh yeah, so keywords is kind of a new thing in the last several years. More journals, because of search engines, are asking you to choose phrases or words, again, for the purpose of people doing searches of databases and, you know, linkages across what's available now technologically. So these keywords, more and more journals will list the keywords, and you can choose your words, but what you choose is going to determine whether or not people doing searches find your article. Do you have anything to add on keywords, Dr. Chang, in terms of choosing them well, or how many from your experience?
Yeah, a lot of times that actually journals indicate how many keywords that you should
like
include,
5,
right?
4.
Yeah. And then also that keywords are typically a word, but some journals has allowed maybe 2 words phrase. So
Yeah.
be careful about this. And then some people have sort of used rather genetic terms, and you don't want that. So it's or repetition of a title. So the bottom line is that, for example, if the title does not have a certain theory, the central theory of your study, then you might as well take advantage of the keywords to help the discoverability of your article.
Yeah, so the whole purpose is to let people doing searches in an area related to yours find your article. So let's go to the next slide. So the introduction is what lays the foundation. This would be like your chapter 1 of your dissertation, the context, the history, the relevance of the article that you're writing. What's the problem? I mean, I don't know if Eastern is as fussy about this as we are, but you need to articulate what's an issue, what's a problem, what have we not resolved? Why should people care in terms of your conducting your research or writing this article, and then logically guiding the reader toward the research focus and the hypothesis of the research questions and the methodology. So if you're confident with the literature, it should be fun to write the introduction, because it really lays the foundation and the groundwork for what you're going to present in the article, but it's contextual. So it gives the reader the context of what we already knew.
Can I say one thing? That as a writer, we tend to think we write, we begin with this introduction, but the reality is that what we start with the introduction oftentimes is a working draft that will need to be revised seriously. So I always think that even though we read introduction first, even though we start with the introduction in writing, that with the introduction in the final product is a much more refined and revisited even after everything is finished. So that introduction has to be taken so seriously.
So in our dissertations and in a good article, our students write a 2,000-word problem statement. Why is this topic important to the field of higher ed? Why should people care about this? What's the gap? What do we not know yet? And that can become a very helpful centerpiece, shortened, for an article introduction as well. And then presenting your results and findings depends a lot on your methodology or what's your purpose in writing the article, but linking the findings to the literature comes after you present your findings. So that's the discussion section, and usually presenting the results in a quantitative study particularly, but sometimes qualitative, using figures and charts and tables to synthesize and summarize and give a visual illustration of what you have found in your research. So these are all chunks that you can find examples and say, okay, I'm going to find another autoethnographic study, and see how they wrote up their methodology for this journal. And then at least you've got some templates and some models to work with. What's the next one there? Yeah, so the discussion, we use the term sing. We want the discussion section to sing, which means you have confidence that you know the literature, you have a sense of excitement about contributing something to the literature, and you're like primed and pumped to present your discussion of what you have contributed in light of what we already knew. So I don't want to go through all those details, but essentially your discussion either corroborates what we've already known or nuances what we've already known or adds to what we've already known. We knew this about first generation football players from New England, but I just looked at the Midwest and the findings are different than the New England football players, that kind of thing. So you're discussing what exactly we can learn from reading what you have done. And then always I say to the students, and I watch in articles that I work with, what's your land the plane section? What's your conclusion? Which should be directly drawn out of your results without overextending. For example, in the implications for practice, usually I find that students in articles and in dissertations are all over the map with every good idea they can come up with that relates to their topic, but your implications for practice and your conclusion should be grounded in your findings, what you knew about the literature and what you have found. And then, as I said, typically in a research oriented article, you've got your limitations, what are areas of your research and your article that others should be aware of, recommendations for future research and implications for practice. So very quickly, just a couple of slides on what we look for as editors, and I think this would be true for all journal editors. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these are things that we see that are problematic that you might be attentive to. One is that you ideally will get to a place of feeling confident in what you're presenting and developing the case that you're making. It's surprising how many people submit articles that are not well written. They don't lay a solid foundation with what we call the topic sentence, the first sentence of a paragraph and logical transitions from the material before to transition the reader into a new block of material. In general, academic writing wants every sentence to stand on its own bottom and make a complete case. So use active voice, be succinct. Academic writing is active, action-oriented instead of passive. Choose your verbs and your verb tenses carefully. I just was working with like an 8-page paper where the student used the verb share 30 times. And I said, the word share is like very soft. You don't need to use the word share 30 times in an academic article. It sounds like Christian speak, advocate or argue or document, but don't share 30 times in an 8-page article. I didn't say it like that. But just double check both your sentence structure and your grammar to be sure that you're following, whether it's APA, which you use, or whatever the style of the journal is. And I think 1 or 2 more slides and then we'll be done. Oh yeah, the peer review process. Well, Dr. Chang already mentioned this. It would be very rare to submit a journal and the editor affirms everything you've done and says, we'll publish it. Number one, when you go through the peer review process, usually 2 smart people who know your field are going to read your article and give areas where you have missed some important literature or misrepresented somebody's theory or overstated the value of your findings. So the whole point of the peer reviewers is to make sure that people who know your topic and know your field can provide feedback that strengthens your article. So you'll see in the 3rd bullet there, you usually either get an automatic reject. A lot of times the editors or the associate editors are doing a pretty careful weeding out of what comes in because we don't want to waste the time and the effort of the peer reviewers if an article, there's no way this is going to be publishable. So I would say maybe a third to a half of the article submissions we get are rejected before they go to peer review because they're bad. They're not contributing anything. Why would anybody want to read this? You haven't contributed anything and it's poorly written. Minor revisions is the best you can hope for usually, because then people who care and want your article to be stronger have told you, and some journals will actually list like 12, 15, 20 things. You know, we need a more logical transition between this block and this block. We need you to cover this theory that came out in 2019, but you've missed it. And you are asked as the author to respond to each of those items in a grid. It could be 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. Major revisions might have some hope for being published, but it's going to take you quite a bit of work. And then the peer review feedback goes to the editor sends it to the authors, and the authors decide if they're willing to do the work or want to do the work. But, you know, I think, what's the next slide there? Yeah. We worked on this slide together just to be respectful of the people making the decisions. And at the bottom, number 5, reframe. Instead of being discouraged and disappointed when you get requests for revisions, you can push back. You can say, and I think of an article that I worked on with Dr. Hernandez. Do you remember that about autoethnography, where the editors wanted something? And what we had to do, and what you did actually, was to basically prove. Can you remember the situation with that?
Yes, I
So
remember.
we pushed back and we won, right?
Yeah. We did. They did. Well, for one thing, autoethnography is a bit new, and they wanted us to only present findings where almost everybody had agreed on this theme. And so I went back and cited my work to show Huan how we value multivocality. We want to represent as many voices as possible, but in a very kind and respectful way. That's the important thing. And I would just say, Karen and I worked on that. We went to about 2 or 3 revisions, and Karen is a great writer. But sometimes the editors, they want what they want, you know? Yeah.
They're human beings too. I mean, they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. So just because somebody says something doesn't mean you need to salute, but you do want to be respectful. So I just have a couple of minutes here and then I need to duck off because it's 5:30. But any questions or pushback or affirmations or lived experiences that you would want to share?
I had one question about this is probably quite minor, but it was about the use of tense, and you said that we use past tense for research that's in the past, present tense for findings that continue. Can you help me understand the difference? What is a finding that's continuing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of people get confused. I guess I would say there's a lot of confusion, and I get confused. But in general, when somebody conducted research in 1992 and you're describing what that person did, you would use past tense because the research was completed in the past. But then you might say Aston's input, IEO, that model of student engagement, that the theory continues and can still be referred to in present tense because it's kind of an ongoing thing. It's not a specific study that was completed in the past. Does either of you have something else to add on that? It's in the APA manual, but not as detailed as I would have wished. But a lot of people write the whole thing in present tense, and I say, why are you writing in present tense when this was clearly 25 years ago?
Right. So this is how I maybe differentiate. For example, if you say Chang 2008 defined autoethnography as a research method, blah, 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 then I would use a past tense. But if I say the autoethnography is a research method, qualitative research method, and so on, and then I'm not specifically saying that who did it, who argued it, but it is a method that is being considered. So that would be a good strategy. Or if I want to report that the leadership development is based upon XYZ, according to Chang 2015, that's okay, because that it's not that I said, I argued, or I discovered, concluded, because I'm not saying that, because the sentence is about the leadership development is da 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 da. So that would be the difference. But when you are going to say that an author had concluded, or yeah, so Smith concluded that, then it should be the past tense.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for paying attention. That's a great question. On a very small piece. Anything else? I would say again, don't be overwhelmed. As you're working on your papers and you're working on your dissertation, you're going to become more and more familiar with journals. And there will be some journals that surprise you that you didn't even know there was a journal. I mentioned, I think it was UVA or Virginia Tech had a list. If you just Google higher ed journals, for example, or leadership journals, there are hundreds and hundreds. So just find something that seems to fit what you're passionate about and what you're burdened about, or watch for a call for book chapters, and it'll happen. Okay, oh, you're overwhelmed already. I think you'll be immersed in the literature and you'll begin to see, I can think of specific times in my own life where I came across an article and I didn't even know that journal existed. And it was like a sweet spot article that you say, I could do something like that. So.
If I could just add one thing here, I know for graduate students, it's so overwhelming with all you're doing, all